Hello everyone, and welcome to my lecture on the Integumentary System for lab. In this video, we're going to walk through the layers and structures of the skin using our model. You'll need to know how to identify the parts for your lab practical, so make sure to watch closely and review along with your lab manual. Remember, if you're interested in learning more about the physiology, go and watch the lecture video. Now, to get us started, let's talk about the three main layers of the skin. We'll be working from the outermost to the innermost. First, you'll see that we have the epidermis. The epidermis. We also see it over here. And then this is the dermis. And then down here, we see the hypodermis, or the subcutaneous layer here, mostly in yellow, okay? Remember the epidermis, that's our outer thin layer made of stratified squamous epithelium. And notice there's no blood vessels there. It's not vascularized. That means that it's gonna have to get its nutrients from the dermis. The dermis is this thicker middle layer, and it contains most of the accessory structures like the glands and the hair. It also has a bunch of blood vessels right here. See all those? And then down here in our hypodermis, that's made up mostly of fat, and that's going to connect the skin to the deeper tissues. Now, typically the hypodermis, or the subcutaneous layer, is not technically skin. However, it's so intrinsically connected to the skin that we talk about it alongside with it. Now, let's zoom in physically and look at the layers of the epidermis first. All right, here we go. Now, the epidermis is made of multiple layers of cells, and you'll need to be able to identify these from superficial to deep. So here's a mnemonic that might help. Come, let's get sunburned. Here we'll see that the letter of each word corresponds to a layer of the skin. So again, come, let's get sunburned. So we have the stratum corneum, the stratum lucidum here in yellow, the stratum granulosum right here in this lighter purple color, just this area right here. The stratum spinosum, much thicker. And the stratum basale, just a thin layer at the bottom of the epidermis there in that dark purple color. Now that stratum corneum, that top layer, that's going to be thick and flaky, made up of dead, flat keratinized cells. And then that stratum lucidum, that's actually a really interesting one, because if you might notice, you don't see it over here, right? Well, why not? Well, that brings me to another point. We actually have two types of skin. Okay, we have thick skin and we have thin skin, and you can literally see the difference in the epidermis here. In thick skin, we have a much thicker stratum corneum. We also have this extra layer here called the stratum lucidum, and you don't see that over here because this is our thin skin. And thin skin is where we find mostly everywhere on the body. So in most spots on the body, you will not have a stratum lucidum. You'll go stratum corneum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and stratum basale. All right. Now, where do you have thick skin? You have thick skin on the tough parts of your hand and on your feet, right? Because we use it a lot. We get kind of rough with it. So we need to have that extra layer there. Now, let's look at the dermis. But actually, before we get to the dermis, I want to point something out. You'll notice that we have this ridge-like structure here that's going to connect the epidermis to the dermis. right? And notice we've seen this before where we have all these kind of bends, right? And what did we notice? We noticed that it helped increase surface area. And this increased surface area, in this case, helps with adhesion. So we can better adhere the epidermis to the dermis. We can also get better nutrient absorption. Remember how I said that we don't have blood vessels in the epidermis? So we have to get those nutrients into the epidermis from the dermis, and we do that through diffusion. Well, the more surface area we have, the better we can bring those nutrients in to feed the cells. Now you'll notice that we have these little finger-like projections that kind of go up into the epidermis a little bit, right, forming the epidermal ridge. Now those projections themselves, right, can you see those here? Each of these projections, the finger-like projections, not the white things here, I'll talk about those in a minute, but the actual finger-like projections that form the epidermal ridge or help to form it, these are called the dermal papilla. Now, let's look more closely at the dermis. When we look at the dermis, you will see that it's divided up into two layers. We have the papillary layer, which is made of areolar connective tissue, and that's all of this here. This kind of thinner portion where we see all of these blood vessels going in there. Right? It's really, really concentrated with blood vessels. That's the papillary layer, and that sounds a lot like the structure we just learned, dermal papilla. Right? So we can remember that. The dermal papilla are located in the papillary layer. All right? And again, here we contain lots of capillaries and also these tactile or Meissner's corpuscles, the little white things here. Right? This whole little structure here. Right? These Meissner's corpuscles are round or oval shaped touch receptors that near the top of the dermis. Right? In other words, they help us perceive touch, and specifically light touch, because they're right up there toward the top of the dermis, and so we can really feel light things with those. Then we have the rest of the dermis, and that's the reticular layer of the dermis. Okay. In that reticular layer, here we're made up of dense irregular connective tissue. And this is where we have most of our accessory structures. So we'll see hair follicles, sebaceous glands, sweat glands, we'll see an erector pili muscle, and even Pacinian corpuscles. Well, which one's which, Professor? Well, I'm going to tell you. All right, so here we see a hair follicle. You see how we have this kind of extension of the epidermis. It comes down of that bottommost layer, comes down, 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 and it forms this little protective area where we're gonna have this hair grow. Okay, this purple layer here that's forming it, that's our hair follicle. Okay, inside the hair follicle, we have the hair bulb, which is this bulbous portion right here. We have the hair root, and then sticking out on top is the shaft. So bulb, root, shaft. We also see many pores, right? Pore, 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 right? Lots of pores. Right, down here we have this one's going to be interesting, okay? And we have something called a hair papilla. All right, now you just heard that these guys are dermal papilla. So what? Yes, we do have two structures that sound exactly like, okay? We just like to keep things interesting. So here, your hair papilla, you see how you have these vessels that come right up into here, right up into where the hair bulb is. Okay, that's actually going to feed, it's going to give the nutrients for hair growth to occur. So you can see those blood vessels coming right up into there. Okay, all right, that's the hair papilla. These are the dermal papilla. Okay, and I'll want you to specify in the lab practical, hair papilla, dermal papilla. Here we have a sebaceous gland. Your sebaceous gland is going to secrete something called sebum or oil onto the skin or the scalp. This is your erector pili muscle, which allows your hair to stand up, stand on end, or gives you goosebumps. Let's look at our glands. We have different glands. Now, you'll notice that some are whole and some are cut open. These are the same thing, okay? Now, this one and this one, these white ones, these are eccrine sweat glands, eccrine. Eccrine sweat glands secrete sweat, the sweat that we typically think of as regulating our body temperature. We secrete the sweat and then it allows it to evaporate and cool us down. But these guys, these big, stinky, smelly guys, these are apocrine sweat glands, and these are associated with puberty. These are found in areas like the pubic region and the armpits where we have that more pheromone-esque, sweat, that milky sweat. All right, so that's it for the dermis. Then we're going to come down here into the subcutaneous layer or the hypodermis. And here we see this is the bottom layer of the skin model, and it's usually shown in yellow because it's made up mostly of adipose tissue or fat, as well as areolar connective tissue. So here we'll look for adipocytes, right? Those round, bubbly looking yellow fat cells. We'll also find blood vessels, so we'll find these larger red and blue tubes indicating vessels. We'll find nerves in the subcutaneous layer, but we also see here, for example, you see this onion looking thing, okay? This is what we call a lamellar or Pacinian corpuscle. And these can also extend into the dermis as well, okay? These will be important for detecting pressure. And that makes sense, right? Because when it's pressure, it's a little bit deeper. So it makes sense it would be a little bit deeper in our skin. All right, now that's your guided tour of the integumentary system model. Take some time to go back through and practice identifying each structure visually. These are high yield practical exams, right? So get comfortable with how they look on these models. You've got this.